Hello class, and welcome to our lecture on doing ethical research in psychology. In this session, we will explore the critical role of ethics in psychological research and the importance of obtaining informed consent from research participants. We will also discuss the significance of ethics review boards and how they help ensure the protection of human subjects in psychological research. Now, the field of psychology has made significant contributions to our understanding of human behavior, cognition, and, of course, emotion. However, conducting research in this field raises important ethical issues that must be taken into account. Psychological research involves studying human participants, and it is the responsibility of the researcher to ensure that their rights and their welfare and their dignity are always protected. And one of the key ethical principles in psychological research is informed consent. Informed consent is the process of informing participants about the nature of the study, their rights as participants, and any potential risks or benefits associated with their participation. Now, informed consent allows participants to make an informed decision about whether they want to participate in the study or not. Another important aspect of ethical research is the involvement of ethics review boards. These boards, also known as institutional review boards, often known as IRBs, are responsible for reviewing research proposals to ensure that they meet ethical standards and that the rights and welfare of participants are protected. IRBs, or institutional review boards, play a critical role in safeguarding the rights of human subjects in psychological research, because researchers are still people and sometimes they lose perspective or don't consider the perspective of participants. And so it's the role of the Institutional Review Board to ensure that they do and that they follow the rules. So as we move forward in this lecture, we will delve deeper into these topics and explore the ethical considerations that researchers need to take into account when conducting psychological research. And by the end of this session, you will have a better understanding of the ethical principles that guide psychological research and the importance of obtaining informed consent and engaging in IRBs to protect human subjects. Now, in today's lecture, we will explore, first off, ethical principles, as well as the structure of ethical research, and then finally a little bit on the research with animals. But to start off, let me begin by telling you a story. And I want to begin by telling you a story of psychological research gone wrong and why it's so important to have strong rules in place for research. And one example is what is known as the monster study in the late 1930s at the University of Iowa. The monster study is a clear example of unethical research in psychology. The experiment, conducted by Wendell Johnson and Mary Tudor, violated several ethical principles, including informed consent, debriefing, and the duty to do no harm. The study was conducted without the informed consent of the orphans or their caregivers. First off, the fact that they're studying orphans is ethically problematic to start with, but even the caregivers aren't informed, which means that they did not fully understand the nature of the research or the potential risks involved. The participants were also not properly debriefed about the experiment, which means that they were not provided with a full explanation of the study's purpose, nor were they given the opportunity to ask questions or receive support. Furthermore, the study caused significant psychological harm to the participants, which is an unacceptable outcome in ethical research. The children who received negative feedback and ridicule experienced worsening speech problems and suffered from chronic psychological issues. And this harm was entirely preventable if the researchers had followed ethical guidelines and principles. Now, maybe a little bit about what actually happened in this case. Basically, what happened was in the monster study is they tried different kinds of reinforcement techniques with children, orphans that stuttered, and with some they would give them praise for trying to speak more clearly, and others they would simply be emotionally abusive to, basically, and ridicule them very cruelly. And so right there you see that there's all sorts of problems. And the monster study highlights the importance of ethical standards in psychological research. It demonstrates that unethical research can cause lasting harm to participants and can have severe consequences for the individuals involved in the field of psychology as a whole. And ethical guidelines are in place to protect the well-being and rights of research participants and must be followed rigorously to prevent future incidents like the monster study. By adhering to ethical principles, researchers can then conduct studies that advance our understanding of the human behavior, while also ensuring the safety and dignity of research participants. So, I want to welcome you to the world of psychological research where ethical considerations play a critical role in the work that we do. As scientists, we are constantly exploring new ways of understanding human behavior and the factors that shape it. However, with this pursuit comes the responsibility to consider the ethical implications of our research. Just like physicists and biologists and medical researchers, psychologists are constantly grappling with ethical questions related to their research. Our work has the potential to cause stress and harm or inconvenience to the people who participate in our studies, and as such, it is essential that we uphold ethical principles to protect the well-being and dignity of research participants. For example, as researchers, we may need to deceive our participants temporarily about the nature of our research to get accurate results. We may also induce stress or anxiety or negative moods in our participants, or even expose them to maybe weak electrical shocks, all of which must be carefully considered and justified to ensure that the participants are not unduly harmed. Additionally, researchers may need to use animals in their studies, which raises important ethical questions that must be addressed to ensure that the animals are treated humanely. So overall, to ensure that our research is conducted ethically, psychologists adhere to a set of ethical guidelines and principles. And these guidelines address issues related to informed consent, debriefing, confidentiality, and the treatment of research participants, including animals. By following these ethical principles, we can ensure that our research is conducted in a manner that upholds the dignity and well-being of all the individuals involved. So I want to start off by exploring a little bit of the ethical principles in psychological research. As we've discussed earlier, ethical considerations are critical in any research involving human participants. And it is essential that researchers adhere to a set of ethical guidelines and principles to protect the well-being and dignity of participants. So, in this portion of the lecture, we'll discuss the essential ethical principles that should be followed when conducting psychological research on human participants. The first principle of ethical research is the creation of trust and a positive rapport between the researcher and the participant. And this is achieved by treating the participant with respect and concern and attempting to make the research experience a pleasant and informative one. When participants feel comfortable and safe, they are more likely to provide accurate and honest responses. The second principle is the rights of both the experimenter and participant need to be considered, and the relationship between them is mutually beneficial. The experimenter must ensure that the participants' rights are respected throughout the entire research process, and that the participant is not exploited or harmed in any way. At the same time, the experimenter must be able to conduct their research without any undue hindrance or obstacles. The third principle is that before the research begins, the participant is given all information relevant to their decision to participate, including any possibilities of physical danger or psychological stress. The participant must be fully informed about the purpose and nature of the study, the procedures involved, and any potential risks and benefits. And the participant must also be given the opportunity to ask questions and have them answered in a manner that is understandable to them. The fourth principle is that after the experiment is over, any deception that has been used is made public, and the necessity for it needs to be explained clearly and simply. In some research studies, deception may be necessary in order for the research to obtain accurate results. However, the onus is on the experimenter, and the experimenter must ensure that the participant is made aware of the deception and that the reasons for the deception are clearly explained. And deception should only be used in extreme cases where there is no other way to gather the information. The fifth principle is that the experimenter carefully debriefs the participant, explaining the underlying research hypothesis and the purpose of experimental procedure in detail and answering any questions. And this is critical to ensuring that the participant fully understands the research and its implications, and that they do not experience any undue stress or confusion. The sixth and final principle is that the experimenter provides information about how they can be contacted and offers to provide information about the results of the research if the participant is interested in receiving it. And this provides an opportunity for participants to follow up on their involvement in the research and to receive feedback about the study's outcome. In so doing, they feel better about the research, and they're more likely to communicate positive experiences about psychological research, and that in turn helps the participant, it helps the researcher, and it helps the field as a whole. Now, let's discuss some examples of unethical research in psychological research. A good example of this that I've already mentioned is the monster experiment, but there's some other ones that are fairly famous. There is sometimes you may watch some research psychology videos hosted by a famous psychological researcher by the name of Philip Zimbardo, But he had a scandalous beginning to his career where he conducted something known as the Stanford Prison Experiment in 1971. And in this study, participants were randomly assigned to play the roles of prisoners or guards in a simulated prison environment. The experiment was terminated after only 6 days because of the unethical treatment of prisoners. However, in the aftermath of the study, Zimbardo conducted thorough debriefing sessions with the participants and ensured that they received appropriate psychological support. So that's good, at least. He mitigated the damage. Another example is the Milgram experiment conducted by Stanley Milgram back in 1961. And in this study, participants were instructed to administer electric shocks to another participant under the guise of an experiment. While the study was controversial, Milgram carefully debriefed the participants and explained the purpose and importance of the study. But in the midst of the experiment, the participants were commanded to administer lethal doses, or what they thought were lethal doses of electric shock, to other participants. So there's some ethical issues in there. Now, in essence, ethical considerations are crucial in psychological research involving human participants. The principles of creating trust and rapport, considering the rights of both the experimenter and the participant, informing the participant of the research procedures and any risks involved, explaining any deception used, and debriefing the participant and providing feedback are all critical to ensure that research is conducted in an ethical and respectful manner. And adherence to these principles protects the well-being and dignity of the research participants and ensures the validity and reliability and ethical standards of the research. And on top of that, it provides a good name for psychology as a whole and psychological research. And all of that is very important. So that's it for the first part of our lecture, and we will continue on a little bit later after you have a little bit of a break, and we will explore a little bit of the structure of ethical research as well as ethical research with animals. You take care. Goodbye.